Hi, so it's Anna with Anna and Tanya's reading of The Night Watch. It is the glorious 25th today. Tanya and I are sitting at Dundurn Cemetery in front of Tilden's grave, which was a fortuitous find. So Mrs. Soupson's just gone home, and I will get down to business. Carcer looked down the length of Lobsneaks. "Looks like we just follow the trail of Egg," he said. "Looks like Keel has a yellow streak." It didn't get quite the laugh he'd expected. A lot of the men he'd been able to collect had a more physical sense of humor. But Carcer had, in his own way, some of Vimes's qualities, only they were inverted. It takes a certain kind of man looks up to someone who's brave enough to be really bad. "Are we going to get in trouble for this, Captain?" And, of course, you got those that were just along for the ride. He turned to Sergeant Knock, with Corporal Quirk lurking behind him. He fully shared Vimes's view of them, although he approached it, as it were, from the other direction. You couldn't trust either of them, but they hated Keel with that gnawing, nerve-sapping hatred that only the mediocre can really bring to bear, and that was useful. "How do you think we're going to get into trouble, Sergeant?" he said. "We're working for the government." "He's a devious devil, sir," said Knock, as if this were a character flaw. "Now you lot listen to me, right?" said Carcer. "No mess-ups this time. I want Keel alive, okay? And that kid Vimes. You can do what the hell you like with the rest of them." "Why do you want him taken alive?" said a quiet voice behind Carcer. "I thought Snapcase wanted him dead. And what's the kid done that's so wrong?" Carcer turned. To his mild surprise, the watchman behind him didn't flinch. "What's your name, mister?" he said. "Coates." "Ned's the one I told you about, sir," said Knock urgently, leaning over Carcer's shoulder. "Keel gave him the push, sir, after—" "Shut up," said Carcer, without taking his eyes off Coates. There wasn't a hint of fear there, not even a glimmer of bravado. Coates just stared back. "Did you come along for the ride, Coates?" he said. "No, Captain, I don't like Keel, but Vimesy is just a kid that got dragged along. What are you going to do to him?" Carcer leaned forward. Coates did not lean back. "You were a rebel, weren't you?" he said. "Don't like to do what you're told, eh?" "They're gonna get a big drink of ginger beer," said a voice drunk with evil delight. Carcer turned and looked down at the skinny black-clad ferret. He was somewhat battered, partly because he'd put up a fight when the watchman had tried to pry him out of his cell, and mostly because Todsy and Muffer had been waiting outside. But he'd been allowed to live. Beating something like ferret to death was, to the other two, an embarrassing and demeaning waste of fist. He certainly flinched under Carcer's gaze. His whole body was a flinch. "Did I ask you to speak, you little dog's tonker?" Carcer inquired. "No, sir." "Right. Remember that. It could save your life one day." Carcer turned his attention back to Ned. "Okay, Sunshine, this is the bright new dawn you wanted. You asked for it, you got it. We've just got to sweep away a few of yesterday's leftovers, by the order of Lord Snapcase, your mate. And it ain't your job to ask who and why, but young Vimesy, why, I think he's a game lad who will be a credit to the city if he's kept out of the way of bad company. Now, Knox says you're good at thinking, so now you tell me what you think Keel's gonna do." Ned gave him a look that went on for slightly longer than Carcer felt comfortable with. "He's a defender," he said eventually. "He'll be back at the watch house. He'll set a few traps, get the men tooled up, and wait for you." "Huh?" said Carcer. "He doesn't like to see his men hurt," said Ned. "This is not going to be his day, then," said Carcer. Halfway down Cable Street was a barricade. It wasn't much, a few doors, a table or two. By the standards of the big one that was even now being turned back into unbelligerent dining room furniture, it barely existed at all. Carcer's informal crew walked slowly, staring up at the buildings and into the mouths of alleys. People in the street fled at their approach. Some men walk in a way that projects bad news ahead of them. Vimes crouched behind the makeshift wall and peered through a crack. They'd snatched a few crossbows from aimless soldiers on the way here, but by the looks of it Carcer's men had at least 15 between them, and they outnumbered the Lilac lads almost 2 to 1. If push came to shove, he'd take Carcer out right now. It wasn't the way it ought to go. He wanted people to see the man hang. He wanted the city to execute him. Going back empty-handed would leave a loose end flapping. He heard the sound of sobbing from further along the barricade. It wasn't young Sam, he knew, and Nobby Nobbs had probably cried all the tears a body was capable of some time ago. It was Reg. He sat with his back to the makeshift defense, his threadbare flag across his knees and tears dripping off his chin. "Reg, you ought to go," Vimes hissed. "You don't even have a weapon." "What's the good of it, eh?" said Reg. "You were bloody right, Sarge. Things just go round and round. You got rid of the bloody unmentionables, and here they are again. What's the point, eh? This city could be such a great place, but no. Oh no, the bastards always end up on top. Nothing ever bloody changes. They just take our money and mess us around." Carcer had stopped 20 yards from the barricade and was watching it carefully. "Way of the world, Reg," murmured Vimes, counting enemies under his breath. And a big covered cart came around the corner, rocking under its load. It rolled to a halt a little way from Carcer's crew, partly because the way was blocked, but mostly, perhaps, because one of the men had walked up to the driver and aimed a crossbow at his head. "And now the bloody bastards have won," moaned Reg. "Every day of the week, Reg," said Vimes, trying to follow the movements of too many people at once. Other men were spreading out. After all, they had the firepower. He couldn't let them get behind the barricade. Is it supposed to have gone black? The screen?
Oh. It just powers down.
Okay. Well, that was a way to cut the dramatic tension. The man holding up Mr. Dibbler, the cart driver, wasn't paying too much attention. Now Vimes wished he'd put himself in the wagon. Oh well, someone had to start the rumble. "Yeah? You want to shoot something? Bastards!" They all stared. Carcer, too. Reg had stood up, waving the flag back and forth, and was clambering over the barricade. He held the flag like a banner of defiance. "You can take our lives, but you'll never take our freedom!" he screamed. Carcer's men looked at one another, puzzled by what sounded like the most badly thought-out war cry in the history of the universe. Vimes could see their lips moving as they tried to work it out. Carcer raised his crossbow, gestured to his men, and said, "Wrong!" Reg was hit by 5 heavy bolts, so that he did a little dance before falling to his knees. It happened within seconds. Vimes opened his mouth to give the order to charge, and shut it again when he saw that Vimes opened his mouth to give the order to charge, and shut it when he saw Reg raise his head. In silence, using the flagpole as an aid, Reg got back to his feet. 3 more arrows hit him. He looked down at his skinny chest bristling with feathers and took a step forward, and then another. One of the crossbowmen drew his sword and ran at the stricken man, and was knocked into the air by a blow from Reg that must have felt like it had come from a sledgehammer. And in the ranks of the crew there was a fight. Someone in a copper's uniform had drawn his own sword and taken out 2 bowmen, and the man at the cart was running back to the action. "Get them!" Vimes yelled, and leapt over the barricade. There was no plan anymore. Dickens and his men poured out of the cart. There were still loaded crossbows out there, but a bow is suddenly not the weapon you want to be holding when angry swords are approaching from both directions. It'll come when you call. All plans, all futures, all politics were elsewhere. Vimes scooped up a fallen sword, and with a sword in either hand screamed wordless defiance and launched himself at the nearest enemy. The man went down headless. He saw Snouty go down in the melee, sprang over him to catch his attacker in a windmill of blades, and then he spun round to confront Knocker, who dropped his sword and ran. And Vimes ran on, not fighting but hacking, ducking strokes without seeing them, blocking attacks without turning his head, letting the ancient senses do their work. Someone was slicing toward young Sam. Vimes brought down a sword on the arm in true self-defense. He moved on, in the center of a widening circle. He wasn't an enemy, he was a nemesis. And as suddenly as it had come, the beast withdrew, leaving an angry man with 2 swords. Carcer had retreated to the side of the street, but his men, far fewer, were with him. Colin was on his knees, throwing up. Dickens was down, and Vimes knew he was dead. Nobby was down too, but that was probably just because someone had kicked him hard, and he decided that staying down was best. There were a lot of Carcer's men down, more than half. Some more had fled a maniac with 2 swords. Some had even fled Red Shoe, who was sitting on the barricade, staring at the sheer weight of the arrows in him. As he watched, his brain evidently decided that he must be dead on this evidence, and he fell backwards. But in a few hours, his brain would be in for a surprise. No one knew why some people become natural zombies, substituting sheer stubborn willpower for blind life force. But attitude played a part. For Red Shoe, life was only just beginning. Young Sam was upright. He looked as though he'd thrown up, but he'd done well to survive his first real melee. He gave Vimes a weak smile. "What's happening now, Sarge?" he managed, taking off his helmet and wiping his forehead. Vimes sheathed a sword and quietly slipped one of Mrs. Goodbody's little friends out of his pocket. "That depends on what's happening over there," he said, nodding toward the other end of the street. Sam obediently turned to look, and fell asleep. Vimes pocketed the caution, saw Coates looking at him. "Whose side are you on, Ned?" he said. What did you hit the kid for? Said Ned. So he's out of it. You got anything to say? Not much, Sarge, Ned grinned. We're all learning a lot today, ain't we? True enough, said Vimes. There's even bigger bastards than you for a start. This time Vimes grinned. But I try harder, Ned. You know Carcer? He's a murderer, and just about everything else, too. A stone-cold killer, with brains. This is going to go the distance? Yep, it's got to. We've got to stop this, and this is the only chance. Can you imagine him loose now he's pally with Snapcase? Yes, I can, said Ned. Just as well I wasn't planning anything this evening, eh? But you can tell me this one thing, Sarge. How do you know all this? Vimes hesitated. But at a time like this, what difference did it make? I'm from the city, said Vimes. But, there was a hole in time, something like that. You want to know? I traveled here in time, Ned, and that's the truth. Ned Coates looked him up and down. Blood covered Vimes's armor, his hands, and half his face. From how far back, he asked. Time stopped. Coates faded in a world made up of shades of gray. Nearly there, your grace, said Sweeper behind Vimes. Ye gods, yelled Vimes, flinging his sword to the ground. You are not making any friends here, you know. The sword hadn't hit the ground. It hung a few inches from his hands, and had faded to grayness. There's just a few things we need to tell you, said Sweeper, as if a sword in midair was a minor consideration. What's happened to the bloody sword, said Vimes, to whom it wasn't. Time has stopped for everyone but you, said Sweeper patiently. Actually, that sentence is wrong in every particular, but it's a quite useful lie. It'll just take us a moment to set things up. Now Vimes had time, of some kind, to look around. The whole street was darker, as if the fight had been taking place in the half-light just before dawn. The only color was in the robes and faces of Sweeper and Q as they maneuvered a handcart out of an alley. It held a couple of small stone columns and the body of John Keel wrapped in a shroud. We have some good news, said Sweeper. You have? Said Vimes weakly. He walked over to the body. Indeed, said Q, unshipping the stone cylinders. We thought we might have to persuade you to remove all your armor, but you will not, I think, need to do this. That's because it will stay here, said Lucy. Belongs here, see? No, said Vimes. I don't know what the hell you're talking about. He touched the body. So cold, he said. That's what I remember. He was so cold. A morgue does that to people, said Sweeper in a matter-of-fact voice. Now please pay attention, Commander, said Q. When we operate the... Vimes looked up, violence in his eyes. Sweeper laid a hand on Q's arm. We've got things to do for a minute or two, he said. Yes, but it's vital that he knows how... We've got things to do for a minute or two, Sweeper repeated, making a face. Oh, what? Oh, yes, we've got, things to do. Things to, things. They wandered away. Out of the corner of his eye, Vimes saw them walking back and forth across the street as if taking measurements. He looked back at John Keel, but what could you say? Sorry you're dead? Keel had originally died in the barricades, not in a street fight, but he was just as dead all the same. Vimes was hazy on religion. He attended watch funerals and went to such religious events as the proper fulfilling of the office of commander entailed. But as for the rest, well, you saw things sometimes that made it impossible to believe not only in gods, but also in common humanity and your own eyes. From what he could remember, Keel had felt the same way. You got on with things. If there were any gods, you expected them to get on with the things too, and didn't interrupt them when they were working. What could you say to a dead copper? What would he once said? Ah, he leaned closer. Carcer's gonna bloody swing for this, he said, and stood back. Behind him, Sweeper coughed theatrically. Ready, your grace? He said. Ready enough, said Vimes. We were telling you about the armor, said Sweeper. The thing is, Commander, Q interrupted, that you and this fellow Carcer and all the clothes and possessions you arrived with form an elongated trans-time anomaly, which is under considerable tension. Vimes looked at Sweeper. It's very, very hard to move things out of the time where they belong, but it takes much less effort to move them back to where they were, Sweeper translated. Vimes carried on staring. Everything really, really wants to be back where it should be, Sweeper tried. You're right there, said Vimes. All we do is grease the way, said Sweeper. We give a little push and it'll all snap back. Away you go. Have you had anything to eat this morning? No. Shouldn't be too messy then, said Sweeper. When Vimes looked puzzled, he went on, "Undigested food. It'll stay here, you see." "You mean it'll come tearing out of—" "No, no, no," said Q quickly. "You won't notice. But a nourishing meal when you get back would be a good idea." "And the armor stays here?" Q beamed. "Yes, Your Grace, everything. Eye patch, socks, everything." "Boots, too?" "Yes, everything." "What about my drawers?" "Yes, those too. Everything." "So I'll arrive in the nutty?" "The one costume that's in fashion anywhere," said Sweeper, grinning. "Then why did all my armor arrive with me when I came?" said Vimes. "And damn Cursor had his knives, that's for sure." Q opened his mouth, but Sweeper answered faster. "It takes 1,000 steps to get to the top of the mountain, but one little hop will take you all the way back down to the bottom," he said. "Okay?" "Well, I suppose it makes sense," Vimes began. "That isn't how it works at all, Lucy," wailed Q. "No," said Sweeper, "but it's a bloody good lie. Look, Commander, we don't have a damn great thunderstorm and we don't have enough stored time. This is a field operation. It's the best we can do. We'll get you back and your prisoner, although you almost certainly won't arrive in the same place because of quantum. It's hard enough making sure you don't arrive 200 feet in the air, believe me. Pushing all your clothes as well when they belong here, that just takes too much power. Now, are you ready? You need to go back to where you were standing. Get Cursor as soon as you can. You must grab him, otherwise he'll stay behind." "Okay, but I've changed lots of things," said Vimes. "Leave that to us," said Sweeper. "What about Keel?" said Vimes, walking away with reluctance. "Don't worry. We told you at the temple. We'll put him in your armor. He'll have died in battle." "Make sure nothing happens to young Sam," said Vimes, as Q carefully prodded him into position. The little stone columns began to spin. "We will." "Make sure Red Shoe gets a decent burial." "We will." "Not too deep. He'll be wanting to come out again in a few hours." Q gave him a last prod. "Goodbye, Commander." Time came back. Ned was looking at him. "What happened just then, Sarge? You blurred." "You only get one question, Ned," said Vimes, fighting the moment of nausea. "Now let's show Snapcase where the line's drawn, shall we? Let's finish it." They charged, the men falling in behind them. Vimes remembered in slow motion. Some of Carcer's men ran at the sight of them. Some raised their hastily reclaimed weapons, and Carcer stood there and grinned. Vimes headed for him, ducking and weaving through the fight. The man's expression changed as Vimes approached. Vimes was speeding up, shoulder charging and thrusting other bodies away. Carcer raised his sword and took a stance, but there was no room for finesse in the melee, and Vimes closed like a bull, knocking the sword up and grabbing Carcer by the throat. "You're nicked, my old chum," he said, and then it all went black.
I don't know how to stop it. There we go.